Welcome to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. This program is an outpouring of the ministry going on at Calvary Chapel, Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
You make those first mistakes after you become a Christian and you're like, why am I still doing this? I'm a Christian. I shouldn't have any of these problems anymore. And you start to realize, like, boy, I'm not as perfect as I thought I was all of a sudden. I just tell you, that's okay. Esther's not going to do this perfectly, and that's okay. God's not looking for our perfection. He's not. But he's looking for willing people that he can work through, that are willing to step up and say, God, I'll be a part. I see what you're doing here, God. I'll be a part. And that's what she does, and she doesn't do it perfectly.
When we become a believer, it can be difficult when we recognize the perfection that Jesus was and how far off we are from that. Today, Pastor Dan says God's not asking for perfect people, but rather people who will follow him and be used for his kingdom. When you trust God and believe, his Son pays the punishment you deserve. God sent his Son to die on the cross so you can live freely through him. When you trust him, you can know that he's already forgiven you through his Son, so you don't have to be perfect. Now turn in your Bible to the book of Esther chapter 4, as Pastor Dan continues his message, A Time to Confront Evil.
See the value in that. Verse 5. Then called Esther for Hattash, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend unto her, and he gave Hattash a commandment to Mordecai, to know what it was and why it was. So Hattash, in verse 6, went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. In verse 8, also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to give her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication, that is a request, to make a request unto him, and to make a request before him for her people. So now Esther and Mordecai are going to be talking through this chamberlain, Hattash, who's running out to the street, and then Hattash is going to go back up into the palace and talk to Esther. So Mordecai's first request there in verse 8, after he explains the situation to this servant, that all of the Jews are in jeopardy, he asks for Esther to plead before the king to change this order that's been given to have all Jews executed. Now keep in mind, we saw back in chapter 2, shortly after Esther took the throne as queen, we saw in chapter 2, verse 22, in which Esther passed a message to the king, and that message was to warn the king about a plot against the king's life. Remember, one of the king's men was trying to kill him, and Mordecai found out about that, and he sent a word to Esther, and Esther sent a note to the king saying, hey, this particular guy is trying to kill you. And they saved the king's life in doing that. This is different. This is different. Because if you're going to send somebody a note that says, hey, somebody's trying to kill you, you need to know this, they're going to accept that. But if you want to try to get involved in a situation like this is just a political matter. That's the way the king would see this. Well, you want to talk to me about some law I just passed? That's a political matter. That's a business matter. That's not something for the queen to get involved with. That's a political matter. So this is a dangerous thing that Mordecai is asking for her to get involved with the politics of the land. And so this would be her interrupting the king's political business, trying to get a law passed. I mean, we have whole groups of people in our country called lobbyists, that are paid huge money to try to get different laws passed by our politicians. And I don't want to besmirch all of them, but most of them are scoundrels that are advocating for what they want and just trying to pay people off. So this is like straight politics that he's asking her to get involved with here. So verse 9, we continue. And Hattash, in verse 9, came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And again, Esther spoke to Hattash and gave him commandment back down to Mordecai. And this is what she said in verse 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whatsoever man or woman shall come into the king, into the inner court, that's where he conducted business. If you come into the inner court, when you are not called, there's one law for that person, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king for these 30 days. So Esther replies that she has not been a part of any of the politics or the business for at least the past month. She's not involved with that, and that her life would be on the line. She recognizes that this is a life or death situation, very different than her passing a note to the king in chapter 2. This would be her, quote unquote, interfering in the king's business, right? And she sends that to Mordecai. Whoa, Mordecai, do you know what you're asking me? That would be life or death. And so here's his response now in verse 12. In verse 12, they told to Mordecai Esther's words, and then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, and this is his response to her. Think not within yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than any of the Jews. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall the Jews' enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So first of all, he begins his response to her by saying, Esther, your life is already on the line. Whether you realize it or not, you are already in jeopardy. I think if we could realize that in our own lives, sometimes that would help us relax and just serve the Lord. We think to ourselves, I don't want to speak up and have people hate me. I don't want to serve the Lord and then I'll lose a friend. Or, I don't want to say something to Aunt Joey or Uncle Joey or Aunt. It could be an Aunt Joey. Yeah, I didn't mess up. I don't want to speak to them because that'll make Thanksgiving awkward or whatever. Well, it's already awkward if they're not a believer. We're already in the battle. And if we would just recognize that there's already things on the line, then we would step up and we would get involved. And that's what he's trying to get her to understand. There is already life and death on the line. The question is, will we be involved to influence it? That's the only question. I think some of the young people in the room might think, I'm going to serve the Lord, but I'm just going to do my thing. Well, if you're going to serve the Lord, you're already in. You might as well take the chances that God puts before you. Because if you don't, you won't have a chance for the blessing, and you might even be a part of the curse. So be a part. And that's exactly his encouragement to her. He's saying, look, if you don't do this, God is still going to fulfill his plan. Deliverance will still come, but you're not going to be a part of it. In fact, you might end up dying with the rest of the Jews. You might end up dying as part of the beginning of this slaughter before God intervenes. So be involved. It's the same for us. Whether we act in faith for God or not, still going to face troubles. Whether we act in faith for God or not, we're still going to be disliked by certain people. It's true. There's going to be somebody in our life that doesn't like us, whether we're serving the Lord or not. So you might as well serve the Lord. This is that verse that everybody quotes from this book of Esther, where Mordecai says to her, you might as well do it. You might as well do it. And I really want to make the point out of that. We have to choose. When we're confronted with evil, we have to choose to serve God in faith. We have to choose it. Number one, see that God's plan is big and important. That our lives are on the line. It's a big deal. But then next, choose to serve God in faith. Choose it. There's no substitute for that. When evil comes confronting us, you have to choose in your mind, and you have to say, okay, I'm in. I'm going to be a part of this. Mordecai believed that God would do the deliverance, one way or the other. But the question is, are we in? Are we in? God will deliver. Ultimate blessing to be a part of it, or destruction to not be a part of it. And then he even points out at the end of verse 14, did you notice that? He even added, who knows, maybe you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Another way to say that is he's saying, you know what? Maybe this is the big one. Maybe this is the biggest opportunity you're ever going to get in your life. Maybe there's other opportunities coming. Maybe there's some small chances to do things for God, but maybe this is the big one. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Every time somebody opens up and they finally want to talk about the Lord, and you're tempted to say, oh man, I'm going to miss my appointment if I stay here and talk to them any longer. You might want to think to yourself, maybe this is why God brought me here. Maybe this is the very reason He's set up my whole week so that I could be here to talk to this person. Or this month. Or maybe it's the big one for your life. We don't know. We don't know. That should prompt us to want to use every opportunity that God gives us and not miss them. And not miss a chance. I want to go to verse 15 because now that Esther has chosen, all right, I'm in. I'm going to do this. Mordecai has convinced her that she's going to go before the king. She's going to risk her life. What do you think the first thing is they choose to do now? A very tangible thing, a very practical thing. They've chosen to do this. They're in. They're involved. They're going to get their hands dirty. Here we go. What's the first thing they're going to do? Pray. They're going to pray. That's how they prepare. In prayer. Verse 15. Verse 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all of the Jews that are present in Shushan, in this great city, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days and 3 nights. I also and my maidens, we will fast likewise, and so will I go then into the king, which is not according to the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and he did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Okay, I'm going to do this. But if God's not in it, it's going to fail. And so she recognizes the need to fast and pray. It's so funny. It's interesting. This book never once mentions the name of God. The entire book never once mentions God, but He's all through it. He's all through the book. He says in verse 14, when Mordecai was talking to her, he said, if you hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise for the Jews from another place. Well, he's saying that God will deliver them in another way. And now here she says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to fast and pray for 3 days. They're going to fast and they're going to pray to God. There's a substance to who they're turning to. There's a substance to who they believe is going to redeem them and deliver them and save them. And they are turning to God in prayer. Long before the action of going in before the king, she settles it in her heart that she's willing to go all the way in prayer. That's how she settles it. She's in good company. Because Jesus did the same thing. We think about the cross and Jesus' death on the cross being the thing that settled our salvation, right? And then we say that the resurrection proved it. All of that is true, that the cross was the work and the resurrection was the proof. That's all true. But I submit to you, it was settled when Jesus went to the garden. He went to the garden and he prayed, Father, not my will, but your will be done. And he came out of that garden with it settled. All right, this is what you want. It's settled. Our salvation was secured when he was walking out of that garden and getting arrested. It was already settled. It was done on the cross, but it was settled in the garden. And I'm telling you, that's the same thing that we just read. She says, go pray for the next 3 days. And I'm going to do the same thing. And all my ladies, we're going to pray. And that 3 days of praying settled it. All right, we're in. Whatever God wants to do, we're in. We're going to do this. What an amazing thing. See, prayer takes the thoughts of our hearts to a spiritual place with God. And whatever we brought to him, if it is of the Spirit, it remains. And if it's of the flesh, it melts away. And we leave the garden, we leave the 3 days of fasting and prayer with new thoughts. Because prayer changes us. It doesn't change God, it changes us. Has that happened to you, where you prayed on something for an extended period of time, and then, after an hour, after a day, after a week of praying about something, you're like, I don't think I should be praying this anymore. I think I should be praying about this subject in a different way. It's because ultimately it was of the flesh. And God just had to show you that. God had to show me that. This is just something you wanted. I had to change you. And we come away okay with that because it's God melting away the flesh. And they're going to pray and they're going to walk out of this 3 days convicted and convinced. This is God's will. We're going to the king. And that's the same with Jesus. He walked out of the garden convinced this is God's will. This is the way to do this. Wow. We open up chapter 5. Again, it's kind of a short chapter. Chapter 5 is only 14 verses. She's now going to go before the king. In chapter 5, this is that moment. You know, if you've seen any of the Esther movies, this is it. This is the moment where she goes before the king. The bravery to break in where she's not welcome to be because she has a mission from God in her heart. This is it. And I want you to take a note away from these first couple of verses of chapter 5 about how to confront evil. I really believe one of the things she shows us here is that you should deal with it by demonstrating a winsome attitude, a winsome courage. You know, facing evil is not easy. It takes courage to do that. But do it in such a way that you demonstrate, I'm trying to help. I'm not here just to destroy things. I'm here to help things. I'm here to help things. And I believe she does that in many ways as she goes before the king here. Chapter 5, verse 1, it came to pass on the third day. Love that. Love that. That third day always represents that time of death and then new life. For 3 days they've been praying, considering themselves dead. That's what they've been doing. You know that, right? They're praying, Lord, I'm going to go before the king. He's probably going to kill me because I'm not welcome. But if I don't, we're dead anyway. So I'm going to do this. For 3 days, they considered themselves dead. It reminds me of Abraham offering his son Isaac. You remember that? Abraham's there with his servant Eliezer, whose name means comforter. Hello? Father, Holy Spirit, bringing the son Isaac. And the father says to Eliezer, you wait right here, and we're going to go yonder. And they went for what? A 3-day journey. And the whole 3 days, Abraham the father considers his son dead. God's told me to offer him. I guess that's what I got to do. For 3 days, he considered him dead until they get there. And then God stops the whole thing and brings what? A substitute. As Jesus was the substitute for our sins. But for 3 days, he considered his son dead. For 3 days, Esther considers herself dead. And now, after 3 days, she goes in with nothing left, everything on the line and nothing left to hold back. It came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel, stood in the inner court. This is the place of business where she's not welcome, of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto Esther, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given unto thee to the half of the kingdom. And of course, that is an expression that says, ask for whatever you want. Because if a king said, I'll give you up to half of the kingdom, what he's saying is, I'll give you anything you want except for my place on the throne. Because the moment you give more than half the kingdom, now that person's in charge, right? So the expression means, ask anything you want other than to take my place. And I'll give you anything you want. What grace. And so did you notice, though, in these first 3 verses, spiritually she's prepared? Physically, she's prepared. She's beautified herself spiritually. She's beautified herself physically. She's taking it serious. You know, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, I would compliment this. To beautify yourself. Say, I want to be spiritually rich and ready. I want to be physically rich and ready for this encounter. I think sometimes it gets bashed, this idea of dressing up for church, you know. I would never give somebody a hard time if they want to do that. Because some people look at that as, look, I want to look good for God. If that's their heart, great. Good for them. Now, there is a way to dress up for God that is ugly, and puts other people down. There is that too. But if somebody wants to dress up and say, I just want to present my best to God, then more power to you. Good for them. Good for them. But she's on a mission here to win the king's heart and to win his ear, to listen. And so why would she want to go in there in a way that's not helpful to the cause? So she does. She goes in there spiritually and physically ready to go, beautifying herself. Verse 4, and Esther answered, if it seems good unto thee, king, let the king and Haman come this day unto a banquet that I have prepared for him. And so it seems to be that in front of all of these witnesses, all of these political leaders of the kingdom, that she didn't want to address this issue in this setting. I think even here she's thinking of how can I truly get the king to listen to this complaint, that there's a law passed that will murder all of my people. And so I think she's doing this in such a way to say, this, if I bring it up to him right now, he's not going to listen. I'm not going to have his attention like I should. And so she asks for this banquet. She wants to tell him privately because she's thought ahead. Do you get this yet? She's thought ahead. How can I be winsome? Did you notice she said, come to this banquet tonight? I don't think she went to the king and said, would you come to a banquet tonight? And then he says yes. And then she runs out of there like, oh my goodness, I got to prepare a banquet tonight. No. She has already put the plans in place to have this banquet. There's no way she'd be able to host the king and his right-hand man Haman without some preparation. She's already put the plans in place. She's already planned how she can win this conversation, how she can win this argument. Please recognize the effort that she put in to courageously put this plan in place. Would you see that there? There has been dedicated effort on her part to do this the right way. It's not some sloppy, I haven't thought about this thing, right? We continue here in verse 5. The king is going to respond to her, and he's going to come to this banquet, but we're going to see her kind of maybe fall apart a little bit when the king comes to this banquet. And I think it leads us to our next point, which is when we're confronting evil, we have to allow God space to work through our fragility. We're frail. We don't always do things perfectly right? Would you anticipate that, please? When you have to confront evil in your life, you're not going to really do it perfectly. You're never going to walk away after an extended, difficult situation and say, oh man, I just did that perfect. There's going to be things that you're like, oh man, that was kind of awkward. Oh, I'm trying here, but man. When I think Esther's going to face the same thing as the king comes to this banquet. And that's okay. I submit that to you right now. That's okay. See, the goal is not that we have to live perfectly for God. Have you ever thought that? Well, if I become a Christian, now I can never ever sin again in the rest of my life. Has anybody ever had that thought? Well, if I accept the Lord, now I have to be really, really good, Oh, we want to be, but then, you make those first mistakes after you become a Christian and you're like, why am I still doing this? I'm a Christian. I shouldn't have any of these problems anymore. And you start to realize like, boy, I'm not as perfect as I thought I was all of a sudden. I just tell you, that's okay. Esther's not going to do this perfectly, and that's okay. God's not looking for our perfection. He's not. But he's looking for willing people that he can work through, that are willing to step up and say, God, I'll be a part. I see what you're doing here, God. I'll be a part. And that's what she does. And she doesn't do it perfectly.
You've been listening to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. Today, Pastor Dan has been teaching from the Old Testament book of Esther. The story of Esther is a powerful reminder of God's providence and his ability to work through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Though God's name is never mentioned in the book, his presence is woven throughout every event, from Esther's rise to being queen, to her courageous decision to approach the king and save her people. Esther shows us the importance of faith and boldness, trusting that God is always at work behind the scenes, even when we can't see him. Her story reminds us that No matter how uncertain or dangerous the situation, God's plans will always prevail, and He invites us to be part of His redemptive work. If today's teaching encouraged you, visit us online at cchambersburg.org to hear more messages like this. Under the Media tab, you'll find an archive of teachings, or you can download our app for easy access to sermons and updates wherever you are. You can also learn more about Calvary Chapel Chambersburg, located in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. If you're in the area, we'd love to have you join us for worship and fellowship. Service times and directions can be found on our website at cchambersburg.org. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for more valuable insights and biblical truths from the book of Esther. This has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.